when now you are feeling differentiated, now it is perfectly okay to ask for things in the relationship. I mean, that's what we do. You're coming from a place of not trying to manipulate, coerce, control, or get validation. So now I'm saying, I have chosen me, and I would love if we could connect in this way. And now I'm putting that out to this other person. Now, if they say no, but I don't want you to get mad at me, well, it's like, I put this out there. You can say no. If I get mad at you, that's a me issue. I might have some feelings. I might be disappointed. That's part of the human experience, but I can deal with that disappointment and still maintain this connection with you. And when you can start to establish a pattern of emotional safety like that, then the other person might be able to self-confront and say, well, why did I just say no? Why am I unwilling to take a look at this person's needs? Because they're not trying to, at this point now, to coerce, control, manipulate me. So then I get to look at myself. What is it about what they were asking that brought those emotions up in me? And that's where you really start to see intimacy.
We'll make it out and fall in love tonight.
On today's episode, we are welcoming Tony Overbay. Tony is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he's also the host of the Virtual Couch podcast. Tony, we're super excited. We cannot wait for this conversation. One thing I did forget to ask you, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask you now is, do you have a time limit? Are you good on time? Anything like that?
So it's a great question. I normally have supervision with one of my associates, formerly known as interns, in an hour, whenever that is. But I went ahead and let him know that I would at least go halfway into that. And I almost texted him ahead of time and just said, let's just skip supervision today. Because I had a feeling after watching a lot of your guys' content, if you guys have the time, I have the time.
Cool,
yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, then we won't be too overly concerned with it.
No.
And by all means, if it turns out to where 4 hours in, we need to push pause, we can push pause.
I have a client in 2 hours. I will admit that.
Yeah. Okay. 2 hours is hard out. Got it.
Yeah.
Tony, somebody reached out to us on TikTok after we had posted some content around narcissism and co-narcissists and that whole conversation that seems to be kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily gathering steam. I feel like it's probably been in the zeitgeist for the last several years. And so they recommended your channel. They recommended to go check out your stuff, which I did, fell in love with all of it. And now we're here. So thank you for being on the podcast. We're excited for the conversation. And right before we started recording, you were bringing up the difference between emotional immaturity versus straight narcissism, right?
Yeah.
And I think that conversation right there is a great place to start from because of the nuance between those two things. Like just personally, one of the things that I've struggled with is that label narcissism.
Yes.
I fully acknowledge and recognize that I have a lot of narcissistic personality traits. I don't feel like I've never been diagnosed, nor do I feel like I would equal the diagnosis to fall completely on the spectrum and earn that, narcissistic
I'll be able to tell
personality.
You in about an hour. We'll touch it. Okay.
Right. We'll check at the end to see if Craig's a straight up narcissist. But the journey with that has been really difficult for me, and trying to sit with those parts of myself that do display those behaviors, that do, that stuff does come out, and it has come out in our relationship. It's come out in my personal life with friends, family, all sorts of different things. And looking at it through that slight shift in perspective from the emotional immaturity, and it's not, let's just get into it. Let me hear your take on it.
Well, I'm so grateful for the way you set that up. And it's interesting when you introduced me as host of the Virtual Couch podcast. That's still my baby. That's my bread and butter. I think I'm at episode 420 something, but along the way, I would do episodes where I talked a lot about couples therapy because I am a couples therapist. Didn't intend to be initially. I don't know if people start out wanting to do couples therapy because couples have an extra person in the room, and that can be really messy. But then when you really feel confident or you have a nice framework to operate from, then it can be really incredible. So I've been doing couples therapy for a long time, and you would just start to notice that even when you would hand somebody the tools, that some people would just, they would drink from the tools like water in an oasis, in a desert, and then others would immediately take the tool and weaponize it. And you would often see two people coming into counseling, and you would almost make the assumption, this is naive as a early couples therapist, that both people are ready to change. They're ready. They just want to know what they don't know. But then, right. And it's funny. That's what I think therapists get into therapy, really hoping that you'll see and be able to help with. But some people are coming in just to check a box to make sure that they've done it. And then you find that some people actually are in that relationship. There's such a, this black and white dynamic that if one person feels like they have an opinion, then the other person feels like, well, they must think my opinion's wrong. Now I have to take this one-up position and defend my opinion to let them know that actually they're wrong. And it's just this so black or white. And so even when, again, you're providing these good solid tools, it just isn't working. And it seems like what is so different there. And so then I start really looking at the concepts around just narcissism, and I start noticing these traits in myself. And so then I start mentioning my narcissistic traits and tendencies, and I would talk about that, and I would get feedback, and people would say, "Are you being serious?" And in my mind, I thought, I think I am, but on the outside, I'm saying no. Just it's a little turn of phrase, just being pretty funny here. Then I had I remember I interviewed an author. Her name was Tina, and she wrote a book called oh man, I should remember this. It's My Turn, or she talked about growing up with a narcissistic mom. And I remember there were just so many things that she was talking about that then just seemed very they just resonated. And I'm not necessarily talking specifically about, my parental situation growing up. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But then at the end, we ended up talking more. And then I started really looking at what true narcissistic personality disorder looked like. And what's really fascinating to me is that, the idea of like confirmation bias. So then I go in there and all of a sudden everybody looks like a narcissist to me, and including myself. And I start mentioning it more on the podcast. Then I do a couple of episodes about narcissism, and then those go through the roof. And not that I was now saying, well, I got to do more of those because I want the numbers, but I found myself gravitating toward more and more episodes around narcissism. But then I also started just noticing that, okay, narcissistic personality disorder, that diagnostic criteria, it really doesn't fit as many people as we think it does. But yet, boy, the traits you're seeing in the office, sure, there's something there. And at that point, this is where I started getting the idea for another podcast, and it's called Waking Up to Narcissism. And so that one actually is 115, 120 episodes old. And it's now probably tripled the audience of the Virtual Couch, which I've been blown away by. But in that one, I was real distinct about even the name, Waking Up to Narcissism. And I talked about people that are waking up to the narcissistic relationships that they have, whether it's their spouse, whether it's their it could be their boss, their adult child, their parent, their sibling. It could be their church. It could be their family system. It could be so many different things. But then also waking up to their own narcissistic traits and tendencies. So I spent a little while kind of crafting that whole podcast, the idea of it. And so then about probably, I think it's about 10 episodes in, I lay the hammer down, and here we go. A long-winded answer, by the way. You guys are so patient. But at that point, then I said, okay, here's the narcissistic personality disorder criteria. Here's the diagnostic criteria, and PS, maybe 3 to 5%, depending on who you ask, of people in the population would fit that diagnostic criteria. So why is it that we throw it around like 50 to 80% of all people are narcissists? Everybody's ex is, everybody's boss is, that sort of thing. But then I identified the traits around what emotional immaturity looks like. And then I said, okay, we are all emotionally immature in a lot of different areas. And that sure seemed like a easier thing for people to stomach or grasp than being called a narcissist. Because as soon as you're called a narcissist, that is now, okay, now I must defend myself, even if I'm not. And then, and I had these, and I love using humor, but early on, it's almost like that first rule of Fight Club, talk about Fight Club, first rule of being in a relationship with a narcissist, you don't tell them they're a narcissist. So far, that's worked 0% of the time. But people would even hear me talk about it on the podcast, and I would get the emails. And they say, I couldn't help it. I just said, hey, I think you're a narcissist, and that never really seemed to work well. So anyway, that's right. The genesis of then going down this path. That podcast, Waking Up to Narcissism, has been really this journey of I will talk often about, and it's so funny. I've tried so many times to come up with a clever acronym or something, because I talk about if your spouse or partner has narcissistic traits and tendencies, or if they are emotionally immature. That's a mouthful, but that's really the basis of that podcast.
Yeah, I think like you said, the distinction between those two things, I mean, there's a part of it that almost feels like an oversimplification, but then at the same time, slapping that label of narcissism on it is like like it's too much. It's too big of a label. It's too big of a word in a sense. It comes with too much weight behind it because it just isn't super applicable. And I think that framing it around emotional insecurity, because that is the narcissist, right? It's the 4-year-old that's throwing a tantrum, that wants everything the way that they want it, that is unwilling to bend, that, manipulates the situation. It's so clear what it really is and where it comes from, at least from where I'm sitting oftentimes, kind of how I look at things. And the emotional immaturity, suddenly, it's not necessarily an easier pill to swallow, but at the same time, it doesn't come with as much external baggage of having to confront and defend. And it's like, hey, I recognize that I am very stunted when it comes to my emotional maturity and growth. And it's something that I'm actively practicing and actively working on.
Yeah, I love it. And let me kind of set the table while we're here too, is that part of that practice was, so as I'm doing couples therapy, people, if they even sniff around, read anything about narcissism, in essence, it says, okay, stop halfway through this paragraph and run, leave the relationship. The person will never change. But the person that is trying to figure out their relationship, the people that I'm seeing in my office, they don't know. They don't know. They're just now probably hearing about this word narcissism, and then when they start reading the traits or tendencies, or sometimes they're even like, well, I think maybe I'm the narcissist. I've got that as one of the most downloaded episodes ever, is Am I the Narcissist? Which I also say, if you're asking yourself that, you're not. You're the one that's trying to figure it out. And so I'm working with people that are trying to navigate the relationship, figure out what is wrong, figure out, typically, is it them? And there's a big component to that, I think, in psychology in general, where if I can make it about me, then I can fix it. Because if it's not about me, then I may not have any control over it, and it might just be. And now the me thing is I might have to make some decisions that are going to be really uncomfortable. We'll probably talk about that down the road, because that is that differentiation piece. But so as I'm developing this Waking Up to Narcissism podcast, I start looking at, okay, people don't know. They just don't know what they don't know, and now they're trying to figure it out. So then I say, okay, let me develop. I've got these 5 rules of basically interacting with emotionally immature narcissistic people. And the first one I talk about is, I call it raising your emotional baseline. That's a concept that I made up a long time ago. And I like having all the time. We could talk about this one too, but it's really about self-care. And that came about. It was early in my practice, probably 15 years ago. And I had this guy that I was working with, and he's a doctor. And now I think his wife was incredibly emotionally immature, probably one of those who could jump into that personality disorder category. But he would come and he was just a shell of himself. And a lot of times he just said, I like my work so much. Can you just ask me medical questions? And I thought it was just fascinating. So 5 minutes at the end of every session, we would just talk a little bit about medicine, and I would ask him things. And one time I wasn't prepared, and I was driving into work, and this was back in the days of a radio for any of the kids listening. And there was a antidepressant commercial that came on. And then at the end, it's listing all the warnings really quickly. And one of them was, may cause suicidal ideations. And I just thought, antidepressant, suicidal ideations, I'm not really following. So then I asked this doctor about it, and he just laid out the most beautiful idea or concept. And he talked about growing up in, I think it was maybe Wyoming, where it was so cold it didn't snow. And he called that this state of anhedonia. And so then he said, he said people can hit this state of anhedonia as well. And he said, imagine that you are so flat or so down that you just are just existing in bed. And if somebody came and opened up your lip and tuck the antidepressant in there, after about 2 or 3 weeks, you might raise your head up and go, oh, I don't know if this is worth it. So he talked about, you had to work that person through that period where all of a sudden they went from, they don't care about anything, to now, I don't know if I can do this, to now, okay, let's see what we can do next. And so that just hit me with this idea of this baseline, the emotional baseline. So when you're flying high, everything's going great, your baseline of emotions is high, all the decisions are coming at you here. Now, when you start to get down, feel bad or worse, all the decisions are still here, but your emotional baseline is really low. So then when I'm working in my practice, a lot of times people are telling them, do mindfulness, go for a walk, do all these things. And that's going to feel like up here. But if their baseline is so low that they can't really access the tools, then they even beat themselves up more. So this thought of raise your emotional baseline is, the more things you do, even the little things will bump your baseline up a little bit. And this could be read a book, think something nice. You don't have to run a marathon. You don't have to get a mani or a pedi, even though those are nice. But you bump that baseline up enough, and at some point you're going to be able to grab a hold of some of the tools, maybe a little bit of the breath work, or maybe you are going to be able to go on a walk, and that'll bump your baseline up more. Which, quick tangent, this is when I get asked about medication, and I'm not a psychiatrist, licensed marriage and family therapist, but I often say that, my take on this is, if somebody can't even access the tools. Sometimes antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication can bump your baseline up enough to then get the tools, and then you start to do the work, bumps your baseline up higher. Now, if you decide, okay, I don't want to take this this medication any longer, then we can kind of anticipate a slight drop in your baseline, but you've been working the tools for a while. But a lot of times when people get there, they say, why on earth would I stop? So anyway, that's a non-scientific, my take on where things like medication can really help. Back to the story though. So that's my number one rule in working with people in emotionally immature narcissistic relationships, is that you have to have self-care, because if you've been just spending all of your time trying to figure out what is wrong with me, or managing this person's emotions, or trying to buffer for the kids, then your emotional baseline is very low. So we raise that emotional baseline. The second thing I do is I say, get your PhD in gaslighting. Next is it's get out of unproductive conversations when you notice they're unproductive. And fourth, I talk about setting boundaries, and know that a boundary is a challenge for the emotionally immature, the narcissist. And I also like to talk about, boundary versus ultimatum. Ultimatum, you need to stop doing this. Boundary, if you do this, then I will, fill in the blank. But the reason I'm laying this whole thing out is that then that last thing I say is that you'll never give that person the aha moment or the epiphany. And so when you're looking at those different things, you'll find that the person that's in the relationship that's trying to figure it out, and they just read narcissist run, then that's where I'm saying, all right, let's slow our roll a little bit. And let's just start working on your emotional baselines, figure out that gaslighting. Let's get you out of those unproductive conversations, learn how to set a healthy boundary. And then look at how often you're trying to say, but you don't understand, but you just need to do this. But last time you said this, and trying to give them the aha moment or the epiphany. And the irony here is that if you do all of those things, then there's a chance that will change the dynamic of the relationship. But more than likely, you'll start to recognize the unhealthy relationship as it is, that it isn't a you thing necessarily, or that actually the harder that you've been working of trying to prove it, trying to not take care of yourself, that's put you in this position that you're in. And so, and I'm going to go overly generalized here, but so a lot of times by the time people get to that point, then they realize, oh, I think I probably need to leave the relationship if it's not viable, if it's unhealthy. And at that point, then they're like, I should have just gone when I first read the word narcissist, and so then they write the book, and the cycle repeats. So that's where I felt like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. That sparks so many different things. That idea of having a baseline for where you're at emotionally, and having to almost get up to that spot where if you take that person that is in that like really, really like rock bottom low, right?
Yeah.
We think about it all the time through the lens of like the different themes like shame and judgment, and all these different, aspects of emotional things that we'll embody and that we'll be kind of processing through. And the things that are needed to kind of go up a level don't really apply when you're down there at the bottom. And so all that, like you said, mindfulness and, going for a walk, or have you thought about doing this or trying that?
Right.
It's just not a skill or a tool that's really applicable for people in those states because they don't have access to it. There was one other thing that was sparking for me that I wanted to bring up, or that I wanted to mention. And I'm not going to find it now.
If I start talking, you'll remember it. That's the way it works in my practice, So
right.
Please cut me. But I like what you're saying there, because that I just think that isn't talked about enough. Is that when that baseline is low, then it actually, I think it has in essence a net negative effect when even the most well-meaning people are saying, hey, how about you just go for a walk? How about you just take some time for yourself? Or, why don't you start a mindfulness or practice or go to a yoga studio? And then when the person feels like I can't even get out of bed, then they say, man, I really am broken because I can't even do these things that I want to do that I know would help. What's wrong with me? And they just kind of keep like falling back in on themselves. And then that's part that just breaks my heart. And I'll watch people do that. So for sometimes a pretty lengthy period of time. And from the therapist standpoint, it really is just a time to drop back down into empathy. Just tell me about that. What is that like? Because people are so, I think they're starved to be heard and understood. And because you'll watch the person even express themselves and then fold back in on themselves and talk about, but I know I shouldn't be thinking this way, but I know, and that's where I love just being able to talk about the fact that, but check that out. That is something you're thinking. It just is. Let's talk about it. Tell me more. Yeah. I know. Did that work, Craig? Did you remember?
It did. Absolutely.
Look at that.
It was in relationship to, because we talk obviously a lot about our relationship
Yeah.
That's one of the things that is kind of the purpose of this podcast, is sharing our lived experience of growing and healing together over the past decade. And we're trying to show it through a lens as best as we can from like a vulnerable reality of this is kind of what we're going through and what we're experiencing, in hopes of holding up that mirror for people. And really early on in our journey and in our relationship together, we were trying to, excuse me, navigate everything together in a sense. We were trying to approach everything together and look at everything together and work on things together. And even upwards into just a few years ago when we actually started to go to therapy together, right? The really, really big shifts and changes for both of us came when we started to address all of our individual issues and all of our individual things first and foremost. Because what we learned over the years was it was just kind of like, we would stay in those cycles if we just continually tried to work them together. It's applying all of those tools and techniques that we might have heard about on a podcast or read books about, or therapists would have talked to us about. But we weren't addressing all the unconscious underlying things but below the surface of it, right? Yeah. And so what do you find when you've got couples that are coming to you, or when you've worked with couples in the past, navigating that type of dynamic between two people who might not necessarily, like you said, right? You'd like to think in an ideal situation, everybody's coming to the table with the hopes and dreams of, hey, we're going to fix things, we're going to heal together, and everything's going to be great. But the reality is it's much different than that. How do you get them to see that, hey, if you're not working on yourself, it's kind of, I don't want to say pointless, but I think it's fucking pointless to work on your relationship?
Oh, this is the greatest question, and I'll tell you, it's gonna lead to another lengthy answer, because this is, I know right before we went on air, I was just telling you, I love this stuff. I love this stuff so much, and I have been a couples therapist using this modality of emotionally focused therapy for my couples theory, EFT. It was developed by Sue Johnson. It's a lot of attachment based concepts, and I've been doing that for a decade. I mean, well over 1,000 couples. I've got a marriage course, the magnetic marriage course that I talk about this on. And I love everything about it, but there is a part of it that then kind of you get to this place where, okay, what do we do next? And then I thought, okay, what do you do next? And so I start looking into the world of differentiation. And then there are couples therapists that just work on being differentiated, which is this human need we have to have a connection with somebody while holding on to ourselves, or while learning about ourselves, or managing our own autonomy in the relationship, which can seem a little bit like a paradox. And then I start noticing, and this is again, all of this is a me thing. This is my experience, but I seem to find that I'll just say the EFT therapist, emotionally focused therapy therapist, and me and others, we're talking about this concept, these emotionally focused therapy concepts, and we're just building our whole foundation on this tool. And then I find that the differentiation therapists are working out of this differentiation lens. And so then I start thinking, man, if we all talk together, it's kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup thing, the chocolate and the peanut butter, and it's amazing. So let me just kind of take you on my train of thought here. I've got what I call these 4 pillars of a connected conversation, which I've been using for my couples therapy for a long time. And this is based off of the emotionally focused therapy, the EFT model. And EFT is based around being heard. To be heard is to be healed. And you're basically checking in to see if, with your partner, do you love me? Can I count on you? Do you have my back? Are you there for me? So let me just pause that for a second and say, and then the genesis of this journey came in. I had a therapist that I really love come on my podcast named Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, and she is well known in the differentiation space. And I just happened to ask her, what do you know about EFT, emotionally focused therapy, and what my 4 pillars are based off of? And she said, I know a little bit about it. And she said, to me, the locus of control is, I don't like where that's located, because it really is, you're handing your heart in essence over to the other person, and that gives them the potential to crumble it, throw it on the ground, stomp on it. And then you can really, have some big time feelings of rejection, which I see a lot of that in this, kind of getting back to your question. I see a lot of that in the couples therapy model. And so then that was just enough. And it was a couple of years ago to pique my interest. And then I just went on this deep dive of what differentiation looks like. And so now, if I've got my 4 pillars and you've got a couple, and I'll give you a good example. I did an episode recently where I had a couple in my office. There have been some, the husband had some struggles with turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms like pornography. And so he had been caught, we'll just say, and his wife was really upset. So she had found a betrayal trauma group. So she was viewing it as serious betrayal. And so she started using this term emotional abuse. So she was saying that he has been emotionally abusive. So they're in my office as a couple. And so when she says he's emotionally abusive, he gets immediately angry and pretty dysregulated. And then now she also gets to throw in he's also narcissistic. And so we're just running around in circles. And on this episode I did a while ago, I said, let me run that through my 4 pillars, emotionally focused therapy lens, and I'll show you what it looks like differentiated. And then I think this will show you where I think the gaps are and where they need to work together. So from the 4 pillar standpoint, what my 4 pillars are is I've got this pre-pillar where it's based off of Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, where we make an observation of what somebody's doing and we make a judgment. And so if I see that my kid's not doing his homework and I say, oh, he doesn't do his homework because he's lazy, now I've just made that judgment to go along with that observation. And we really need to be able to separate the observation, he's not doing his homework, and remove the judgment, because I make that judgment to make me feel better about myself or try to make sense of the world. And so the reality is it can't be because I don't know math beyond 4th grade and couldn't help him with his homework. I mean, it couldn't be because he asked for a tutor and maybe one of us said, hey, how about you just try a little harder? No, it's because he's lazy. So I've made that to make me feel better. And the really difficult part about that is now if I go up to him and say, hey, champ, why aren't you doing your homework? And he says, oh, I don't really understand the concepts or whatever. In my mind, I'm like, because he's lazy. If he doesn't say, Dad, I'm pretty lazy, then I'm going to think he's not even being honest with himself. So in these 4 pillars, I call it this pre-pillar, which is based off of that nonviolent communication concept. So we see our partner do something and we immediately kind of make this judgment. Oh, I know why they're doing that. They didn't look at me when they walked in the room because they really don't love me, but the observation is they didn't look at me, period. So we got to stop there. So that leads to, so I've got this pillar 1, which is giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, that I don't really think that people wake up in the morning and think, you know what, I'm going to wait till I get home and I'm just going to walk right by my spouse. I'm going to ignore them. Like that'll show them. So that's the pillar 1. Then the pillar 2 is we can't tell somebody that what they're doing or thinking is wrong, or even that I don't agree with them, even if I do think they're wrong and I don't agree with them. And you'll start to see here that I think these 4 pillars I want to say the death of every conversation, but you'll see where any conversation that goes out in the weeds, it typically will be because somebody did not give somebody the benefit of the doubt, or they did immediately say, that isn't what happened. That's ridiculous. That I don't even believe you. Because now we got to defend ourselves. That leads to pillar 3, which is kind of borrowed it from Stephen Covey's Seek First to Understand Before Being Understood. And it's just ask questions before making comments. So if I'm assuming good intentions or giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. Then I'm going to say, hey, tell me more. So if we jump back into this example of if the wife is saying you are emotionally abusive, now if the husband can then say, okay, that pillar 1, I have to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though I'm hurt. I don't believe she probably is trying to hurt me. Then that pillar 2, I can't tell her she's wrong, even though I really think she's wrong. I do not think I'm being abusive. Then pillar 3, hey, help me understand. Take me on your train of thought. Help me help me see my blind spots, or tell me what that means to you. So in that scenario, then she lays out going to a group, and they talked about betrayal and abuse. And so then that's where I think the empathy starts to develop. It also challenges the ego, because now he's hearing the things that he normally would say that's not the case. And then my pillar 4 is you have to stay present and not go into kind of like a victim mindset. Because if he would have then said, you're right, I'm the world's biggest abuser, lock me up, throw me away, then he's in essence wanting her to rescue him and say, no, I shouldn't have said that. So there's these 4 pillars. And when I'm doing that, now she feels understood and heard, and he has more information, and then I would reverse it. Now he's going to express himself and she's going to hear him, and those same rules apply. So in that scenario, using the 4 pillars, then he said, okay, I appreciate that. That might not be my experience. And then this is based on a true story. Then he shared that he had been physically abused as a child. His dad had pushed him downstairs. He had broken an arm. So when he would hear abuse, then he would that was the last thing he vowed to do. I will never be an abuser. As a matter of fact, he turned to those unhealthy coping mechanisms when he would feel frustrated, because the last thing he wanted to do was abuse, and he didn't have the tools to really know how to address those big feelings. And so at that point, now that one's an easy one, where she's giving him the benefit of the doubt. She's not telling him, I don't believe your experience. And she's saying, oh my gosh, what was that like? And then she stayed present. And then when a 4-pillared conversation works beautifully, then my joke is that the fight is, she's saying, I'll never say that again. He's like, no, you can say it all you want. Like, I'm so sorry if you feel like that's abuse. And she's like, no, and so that's the beautiful, model of that. And so that's the couple. When I see that couple come in, hope and humanity is restored. And, there's, I don't know, rainbows and unicorns and a pot of gold, all those things happen. So then from a differentiation lens, what that therapist would in essence say to the guy, if she's saying he abuses me, then I would say to him, do you think that you're abusive? And if he says I don't, well, then you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to tell her she's wrong. You can hold on to yourself in that conversation. And so in that moment, from a differentiated lens, there's these principles, and it's from a therapist named David Schnarch, and they're really powerful. And I'm bringing up a little cheat sheet because I love this stuff. But in that scenario, your goal in being differentiated is developing a solid and flexible sense of self, which means knowing who you are without needing somebody else to tell you. But that key there is solid but flexible sense of self. So am I abusive? I'm willing to self-confront. I'm willing to sit with that discomfort. And we're so wired to alleviate that discomfort. That's often when we go big, we tell our partner that they're wrong, or, you don't understand. And then being authentically yourself in the face of pressure from others to be something you're not. That's another beautiful concept. So if he's going to then take ownership of something that he doesn't believe, then he's going against this concept of being differentiated, because he just wants to alleviate the discomfort, or he just, he wants validation in essence. And that's a big part of it, is learning how to self-validate rather than rely on others to validate you, that concept of external validation. And it's so hard to not want external validation. I think when we jumped on here, I forget what I was asking you, if my background looked okay. And I said, I am seeking validation. So that's like me being intentional,
Yeah. I think the whole validation part of, like, I don't know if I've ever heard that word. I've heard the word differentiation, but I don't think I understood. I don't think I knew that it was some form of therapy or some modality. Yeah. And, I don't think I want to get into it even more, because I think the reality is that is one of the key things that we, like, the journey of life itself is to be able to fully express yourself as a human and to be yourself and still be a part of something else. Right.
Yes,
and we need both of those things. We need to be able to be everything that we are in every way that we want to be. And we also still need to feel loved and to be loved and to be part of something else, right? To be accepted by community, by partner, by family, whatever the case may be. And that journey alone, like, if I just frame my lived experience, I feel like that is what I've been trying to do for as long as I can remember. I've been trying to say, no, I want to be myself. I want to do this thing. I want to say this thing. I want to act this way. Like, there's a part of me that hates going along with the crowd, hates going along. I'm not one to just fall in line with the norm as far as what we're supposed to be doing with life.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I crave it. I want it. I want routine. I want structure. I want love. I want all of that stuff.
It's brilliant. And I love the flow.
What were you going to say, babe? Sorry, hold on.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Steph.
Oh, no, it's backing it up. So it might mess up the train of thought, because we've spoken a lot about narcissistic personality disorder, which is a very low percent, you said, narcissistic traits and emotional immaturity. Yeah. But, and maybe I just missed it, but somebody that's coming in and listening and seeing how it's showing up in different ways. I love your pillars and your 5 baselines that you came across. I'm sorry if I said that wrong, or starting with your baseline. Yeah. They're so important, but when you're still trying to figure out, there is that awareness, and maybe I get lost in labels sometimes. Yeah. And so if I'm trying to figure out, okay, is this narcissistic personality traits? Is this emotional immaturity? Because you said that's the bigger spectrum of it. Can you help me understand what the difference is? Can you point out some of the traits?
We just wanted to push pause real quick on the podcast and invite you to come over and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We want to reach over 1 million people with this podcast, and we're going to need your help to do it. Head over to YouTube, search out Steph and Craig, and hit that subscribe button. You'll find all the episodes of the podcast there, as well as some clips from each episode. If you're feeling extra generous, which we hope that you are, do us a favor and share an episode with somebody. maybe even this episode that you're listening to now. We believe that healing is possible and that we all do better when we do it together. Thank you for the support. Now let's get back to the show.
What's so good about that, Steph, is I think you represent most everyone that then I know that I get excited about this. And it's interesting, even when you look at the concepts of differentiation, I recognized how often I didn't even realize that I'm just wanting to be heard and I'm wanting validation. I want people to say, man, that makes so much sense. And if they tell me that it doesn't, and I want you to know this is why I'm so grateful you said that, because in my more emotionally immature days, then I would have taken offense to that, whether it was deep inside or, and that's what's part of that emotional immaturity is it's people that we're unable to deal with that discomfort. We're unable to sit with that discomfort. And so I love that you brought that up, because I think that's how fine of a line that really is of where, and actually what you guys both just said was that is in essence, it encapsulates we want this connection and we want validation. But we also don't want to be told who we are, what to do. And so you put all those pieces together and it makes sense that it is a pretty complicated mess. It's a beautiful mess though, because I often say that, boy, you don't even go try to find the tools until you are at this point where you do start to go down this what's wrong with me path. And only, let me just give you a sneak preview of the end, nothing. The first time you're going through life is you. And so you're going to figure that out, but we're doing that in relationship with another human. And that's what makes it really, really tricky. And so then, Steph, I go back to I think that's what people are trying to navigate is, okay, is this a me thing? Is it a him thing? Or why do I need him to understand so much? Or, this doesn't make sense. And let me now I'll take a step back. I think there's so many things that are going on here is that, yeah, we want this connection. We also are dying for certainty, because certainty will make us feel better. It'll calm our central nervous systems down. And this is, I don't want to say this as a negative thing, but being able to embrace the uncertain is where really growth starts to occur. Being able to step into that discomfort and find out that, oh, I'm still okay, is where you really start to learn about yourself, and you'll learn about your relationship, because that emotional immaturity in our relationships we are both kind of playing small. We're trying to not really upset the other person, or we're afraid that we might say something wrong. And so we aren't being our true self. And part of that journey of being with another human is, this is both of our first times on earth. And depending on your belief system, I'll throw that in there. But this is where in the world of, now I'm going to throw all these acronyms out, and acceptance and commitment therapy, I mentioned, I love it so much. We'll maybe get to that later, but I've got this phrase I love saying about it, that you're the only version of you, with your nature, nurture, birth order, DNA, abandonment, rejection, hopes, fears, dreams. That is what makes you you. So when people say, what's wrong with me? Nothing. And when they're saying, why did I think the things I thought, or why did I worry about the things I did? Well, let's start from a place of, because go back to point A, where you're the only you that's ever been you. And this is the first time that you're in this situation. So check that out. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. It eliminates that what's wrong with me piece. And I often think that what's wrong with me, we bring into our relationships because we want this other person to validate us. But we also want connection, and we're trying to figure out our autonomy. And so it's being able to step back and say, okay, what if I am okay? What if the things I'm thinking and the feelings that I'm feeling are actually fine? Now I'm basically offering those almost as a gift to my partner and saying, check out this. This is what I'm thinking and feeling. How about you? When I do this, or when I say this, what does that bring up in you? That's what differentiation really looks like. But to get there, you've got to do your own self-soothing. You've got to be able to have this, in the differentiation language, it's this quiet mind, this calm heart. And it's the ability to manage your own anxiety, because it's that anxiety that we bring into the relationship, that we're so afraid that this person will invalidate us, or that they won't want us anymore. That if they really see who we are at our core, that they're going to just go running away. So we're trying to manage even how we show up in a relationship. And so if I can start to figure out that I am okay, and I can learn to be more grounded, and not overreact and not underreact as well, but just show up. This is who I am. This is how I'm feeling. Then I'm basically saying, I've chosen me. Now I'm choosing you as a partner. So let's go have an experience. Let's have some shared experiences, because, when I can stop trying to control my partner, or stop trying to ask them, is it okay that I feel this way? Or is it okay that I say this thing? Then I can really start showing up as more authentic. But Steph, I want to check back in and say, did I just do another tangent thing, or did that Did that help at all, or does that bring up more questions?
That helped. That helped a lot. I think what you were like, the gist that I got, and if I misunderstood, please correct me, was that it's not like, I love that part of speaking about how we need certainty.
Yeah.
Like, I speak so often, we both do, on pushing outside of your comfort zone. And that is where the growth is. I get that. And in the next breath, I'm like, but I need to have a clear understanding. I need to know. So it's funny, the polarity that exists just within that alone. And so I like, it's not about getting hung up on labeling yourself. Because for me, what I was looking at is like, are these narcissistic traits? Are these emotionally immature? I mean, obviously, yes, to the answer, but you don't need to have that certainty on that. What you need to do is be able to really look at yourself and have that separation, because I can't say that other word. Have that separation from the outside energies, know where you are, what you want to say, and be able to like hear your partner and hear where they're coming from. So it's, yes, you have these traits. You don't need to know the differences as much, because yes, they are there. And what are you going to do with this information? Did I kind of get the gist of it?
You did it really well, because I think part of what is so interesting, I was going to say difficult, but we're going to call it interesting and fascinating about the concept of differentiation, is everything is a you thing. At the end of the day, it is a me thing. So if somebody is saying to me that I think that you are, you're abusive, I'll go back to that one. Maybe that one's a tough one to do though, because, but if in this scenario with this couple, if he is the one that needs to then self-confront, am I being abusive? Now, here's where actually I love that you went down that path too, because if I get back to this example really quick, my 4 pillars, the emotionally focused therapy model, I love that because they both felt heard and understood, because we have different meanings for words based off of the different experiences that we have. So now, had they not been able to have that good of a connected conversation, then it's a him thing only, or it's a her thing. If I'm saying to her, do you feel like he is emotionally abusive to you? And if she's saying, I really do, and she's able to do the whole, I'm going to self-confront, why do I need him to understand this? I need to understand it, because then that is a me thing. And then that will help me understand myself more. And maybe part of what that understanding is I don't want to be in a relationship with someone where this is the way that I feel, or this is how I am treated. But then the discomfort is going to come in. Now, what happens so much in relationships is then, okay, let's say that he's on his proverbial high horse, but then when she says, okay, I'm not trying to convince you of what I think you're doing, because I think you're doing it, then that's a me thing. And now I'm going to make the decision to, let's say I'm going to step away from the relationship. Now, all of a sudden, then what does he do with that discomfort? Does he get angry? Or does he then say, no, you know what? You're right. I will change. I will change right now. And now that makes, she likes that. That feels good. That feels validated. She feels validated. And that's where you often see what happens in relationships, is where people try to express themselves, but then one person really doesn't like the way that feels or sounds. And then they get angry, or they play small, or they say, you're right. I will do it. I'll do whatever it is. I'll do what it takes, and then it calms everybody's central nervous systems down, because it does feel for a moment like there's a brief bit of certainty. Okay. And this is where I coined one of my, again, I like the humor, where then somebody will come into my office and say, no, we're good now. And I'll say, oh, tell me about it. And then they'll say, well, no, we worked it out. And that just means we got angry. Then we kind of went into our bunkers. Somebody poked their head out and said, are we okay? And the other person says, yeah, but that's okay. And then we're saying, okay, good. But we didn't address anything. We didn't feel heard or understood. We didn't even really self-reflect. So then I would say that the absence of bad does not mean that the relationship is now good. It just means that we just kick the can down the road. And then over time, that starts to build up.
Tony, it's really funny that you're bringing all of this stuff up and introducing this fancy word differentiation that we both struggle with saying, because we're in the thick of right now trying to unpack. And unpack is just like a fancy word of trying to say, like, live through the experience of healing codependency.
Yeah.
And totally recognizing almost on a daily basis how deeply codependent we are with one another. And for a really long time, it was something that we had zero awareness of.
Yeah.
And it was even something that we, not only were we not aware of quote unquote codependency existing in our relationship or having those type of tendencies or behaviors or being in a codependent relationship. But we were prideful about how enmeshed we were with each other and how similar we were with each other and how, you know, how the same it was literally, I mean, there's a part of me that can laugh at it at this point in our life, even though it's kind of not funny at all. It's really sad on one lens. And we're also still so much in the process of trying to unpack it. Yeah. So when you look at factors like complex trauma, you know, codependency, narcissistic traits, there's all these factors that go into the makeup of somebody. And then eventually they get into a relationship or they grow up and become an adult and try to go out into the world and exist. Differentiation is super scary.
Yeah, it is.
Like, it's really, really hard. It feels like the more that you're talking about it and the more that we're framing it in this conversation, I recognize how my nervous system is so against the idea of it that I will start to get incredibly defensive, angry, upset. All of my fight responses get keyed up and activated when it feels like Stephanie is trying to differentiate herself from me.
Yes.
And I, in turn, when I try to differentiate myself from her, then it's like I can recognize her defensive mechanisms coming at me. And yet it's hard for me in the moment when the shoe's on the other foot, right? When it's vice versa.
Yeah.
So how do we unpack that to the point? I mean, I don't know if there's a question there, but
it's a good one.
Truthfully, it's like navigating that dynamic. I mean, it seems like what we're butting up against right now. Would you say the same, babe? I don't know if I don't want to put words in your mouth like I often do because we're codependent, but
we're having, like, my perspective is pretty similar. And I also have like some nuances that are a little different
right there.
Because my ego also wants to come in and be like, I don't do that, you know, to the point I used to, but not anymore. So it's that part that I'm like, a little resistant there. Maybe you need to look at that a little bit more. Yeah. So I'm seeing it and I have my own experience.
What's so good about that, Steph? Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you. See where the ADD comes in. Go ahead.
I was done. You were perfect timing.
But what's so good about what you just said there, that is the difficulty and an amazing part of being differentiated. And I'll give you a quick story from my own life of my wife. At one point, I think I was telling her that I see so much emotional inconsistency is another one of the concepts that I love looking at, of how emotionally inconsistent people show up. You know, when I'm feeling good, everybody around me is going to feel it. When I'm down, then I'm down. And why don't you understand that I'm going through it right now? That is me wanting somebody to see me, wanting validation, where I need to know I'm okay. But sometimes I feel like if I don't let somebody know that I'm feeling down, then they won't care. And then, and it's funny when you really are becoming more grounded or confident with yourself or differentiated. It's like, wait a minute, but I'm actually okay. Like, I don't necessarily need this person to tell me I'm okay. I am okay. I can talk about an experience I'm having. But anyway, where I go with this is I was sharing something with my wife, talking about emotionally inconsistent people that I was seeing at work. And she just said, oh, I can see that sometimes, you do that sometimes. And I was like, what? No, I'm the best. I'm the funnest, always on guy. And she just mentioned that at times when I come home, it's, hey, everybody, greatest day of in our lives. Let's go celebrate. And other times if they say, hey, can we go celebrate? I'm like, man, you guys, I'm not like a piggy bank or something. And we used to have this, when the kids are a little bit younger, like healthy snack day and unhealthy snack day. And I remember there was a performance one of my kids did at school, and it was a healthy snack day, but I was like, oh, it's unhealthy snack time because, you did so great at this thing. So then I'm the benevolent leader and ruler. I have now deemed the whole kingdom will have ice cream tonight. And so we do. And so then there's another night where I come home and they're like, hey, can we have ice cream? And I'm like, geez, guys, taking advantage of me here. And then I realized, man, that is a me thing. My wife kind of points out that's so over time, it's which version of dad is going to walk in the door. That broke my heart, like that one. And that's one where, like what you're saying there, Steph, is I thought that's ridiculous. But then I thought, oh man, I need to take a look at that. Is there any truth in that? And I think one of the most difficult things about differentiation is that it's hard to self-confront. it does feel uncomfortable. It's hard to not say, well, you're not perfect either, the tit for tat, or to just go so shut down that then I want my spouse to say, you know what? No, actually you're not that way. You're awesome. And I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. Then I feel good now. Then we're good. But to be able to self-confront, and then I really was able to take a look and see that emotional inconsistency, even to the point where I could paint it around what was the vibe in the last client I had of the day, or was this something where honestly, like, had I been paid in cash, if somebody hand me cash that day, Dad's going to go home and make it rain, or was it bills due, and I thought, wow, those are me issues. So that's a me thing. I need to be able to self-confront. I need to be able to stay grounded. I need to be able to self-soothe and not need somebody else to tell me it's okay. So then there would be moments where I would drive home and that was my moment to get grounded. And there were times where I remember just thinking, I'm noticing, this is where the mindfulness stuff's so beautiful. I'm noticing that I am starting to shut down, as I get closer to home. And that's a time then where I think I would want to walk in the door and have somebody say, oh man, rough day. I'm like, yeah, versus I can get myself grounded and know that it was a day. And it was the first one I'd ever had that had all those pieces in it. So check that out. I'm good. And so now I can enter the home and I can be present. And it's an amazing experience. But I think then years later, when you're looking at yourself from a differentiation lens and somebody says, I think you're, we don't know which version of dad we're going to get when you come home. Now I can take a look at that, but I know the work that I've done. And that's where differentiation gets beautiful. I don't need the validation. And yes, it would be really difficult if I did that for such a long period of time that people have experienced me in that way enough that that's kind of their lens that they see me through. But I can't convince them. I can't beg them to look at me differently. I just have to be different. And so that interaction, it becomes this amazing opportunity for growth. And then the more that I show up stable and consistent, that will most likely shift the dynamic, but that's not the goal. The goal was for me to grow through that discomfort and that experience. So I don't know if that kind of speaks to what you're talking about, Steph.
Oh, it does. Can I speak to that for a moment?
Please.
I want to take a little bit of space here.
Yeah, this is Steph and Craig show. You can say whatever you want.
Exactly.
I just heard that so different, and I want to express why it's applying. There's many different spaces in my life where I'm finding myself really unhappy with dynamics. And the thing that is coming up, and that is like, oh, if I'm not happy with this, why don't I change this?
Yeah.
And so that's like coming up a lot. I'm leaning into that. I'm not happy with this. Why don't I change it? And it's hard. I got to get my brain focused because I'm seeing all the spaces where I've seen this piece, but I didn't quite have it. There's an area in space here where there's times it's like, I don't feel like, I don't know if I'm coming or going. Yeah. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Sometimes it feels really, I don't know what the right thing is. I don't know if I'm going to make somebody mad, if I'm not. It's just this really thick space of, do you like me today? Do you not like me today? How am I supposed to act for you? What do you want from me today? Like, how am I? And then just being so afraid and like, holy shit, that's a me thing. Yeah. I'm sitting here like, will you just like make up your emotional mind on whether I'm good enough or not? And it's like, will you make up your emotional mind on whether you're good enough or not? So just seeing that flip of, oh, if this isn't working, what am I going to do to change it? I love that.
Oh, Steph,
that's amazing.
It is, and a you thing in a good way. And there's my little chills moment. That was nice. And let me and thank you for sharing that. And what I think is so fascinating about that too is, I'll take a quick detour back into that world of emotional immaturity. So when I hand somebody that tool of everything's a me thing or a you thing, what's fascinating is the person that I think is working on that emotional maturity is then saying, man, that is a me thing. What you just did right there. What I'll see sometimes in my office is the more emotionally immature person will take whatever the new tool is and now weaponize it. So when they are feeling insecure or uncomfortable about themselves, then they're going to say, well, that's a you thing, and say it to their partner. No, it's a you thing. It's a me thing of why I'm feeling this way. And trying to diffuse that discomfort into the relationship is what we do from a more emotionally immature standpoint. So if I need you to go back to managing my emotions, so I'm going to be angry so that you can help me calm down, versus I need to be able to be calm and I can look at myself with curiosity. So it is a me thing, a wonderful, beautiful me thing. And that shift and it takes time, but that shift starts to be, it looks like, why am I so desperate for this person to understand? Because if I understand, or why am I unable to say this thing because I'm worried about what they'll say? And I love what you were talking about certainty earlier. There's so many of these pieces I think fit together, which is why I loved, before we hit record, when you were saying anything about the specific direction I want to go, this is where I go, and I love it. And when you're doing this in a session, it's beautiful. But you have to build that rapport, I think, and that trust with a client. But in this moment, I want to challenge right and wrong. I mean, I talk about this so often. The concept of right and wrong, I think, is more of a hindsight principle for the most part. And I have a funny example that was very real, where I had a couple, and they were telling me about a prank. They're an older professional couple. They pulled a prank on a friend. They were one street over. It was in a tract neighborhood. And so they did a thing at a house. They rang a doorbell. It was late, and that was not welcomed by the people that lived at that home. And so they were relating this story, and then the wife said, "Man, I know I did the wrong thing." And I just said, "Oh, did you tell the friends that were the house over what you tried to do?" And she said, "I did." And I said, "How'd that go?" Well, she said, "That would have been hilarious." So I said, "So because of your GPS coordinates were one street over, now it was the wrong thing. But if you would have done it this way, it was the right thing. So you just did a thing. And then based on how somebody reacted, then you said, oh, it was wrong, or oh, it was right." So that's where I go back to this. It's the first time I am me in my life, feeling and doing the things I'm doing. So that it just is. So then if somebody's like, "Oh, I don't like how you did that," well, that's kind of a them thing, But I can be curious. Well, tell me about that. What was that like for you? What did that bring up? Because I do want to know if that's something that I can take a look at, self-confront. Maybe I'm not using great language, or maybe I called somebody something I didn't even know what that meant, because I was coming at that without harmful intentions. And so now I do want that feedback, because I can self-confront and grow. But that concept of right and wrong is really fascinating, because it typically comes in hindsight.
I want to bring up, because you were talking earlier, or you just barely mentioned how, the emotionally immature person will take that tool, that technique, that new piece of information, and then weaponize it.
Yeah.
And I've done that a lot. I still do that with some things, where I'll have some new awareness of, like, an aha moment where everything starts clicking for me. And then I'll turn around and just use it against Stephanie, in a sense, where it's like, well, you're not doing this, or you're not seeing this, or, one of the things that I was going to say, like, a funny thing that we and it's not funny. It's kind of frustrating, I'm sure, from your perspective, babe. But it's this, I look at everything on various, like, layers. And one of the layers that I look at things on is just this really zoomed out spiritual perspective of, if it's on my path, it's for my path. Everything I'm experiencing is for my enlightenment and for my growth and for my healing. And there's a part of it where it kind of supersedes personal responsibility for certain things. And so hearing that thing where, oh, you're having a reaction, like, you think my behavior is wrong and it's creating a reaction inside of you, that's up to you to process and go through. I'm just doing something, right?
Right.
That is like, I mean, I'm sure there's a textbook, narcissistic personality trait, whether that's gaslighting or whatever the case may be, right? But where I'm just going to be like, sorry that my action made you feel something, but that's your problem, not my problem.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it more as you're talking, and I'm kind of processing it, and I'm thinking about how I think society as a whole is so emotionally immature.
Yes.
Because we oftentimes aren't taught so many different aspects of it, right?
Yeah.
Both in our family lives, but also in society as a greater whole, that we're all just grabbing a hold of all of these tools and all of these techniques and weaponizing them against one another in order to self-soothe and in order to, like, correct myself and being like, I'm not the narcissistic one because I don't actually do that thing. And because I've studied this and I've read that book and I can identify and point out. And I also want to bring up too, there's a part of me that I've started to recognize as, like, it's a version of me that is wanting to point out things and call things out, right?
I heard this on the internal family systems episode, and I was like wanting to be part of your inner child gang so that I could comment on this. No, talk about that. I love that.
Yeah. And I can recognize it because I've been sitting with it and processing it for several weeks, and it's definitely an emotionally immature part of me. But I think it's also, when I think about the spectrum of like mental health or even just emotional health, I think the spectrum is so vast, and the reality is so few of us, and rather than externalizing it and speaking about, society, like I'm on this journey of trying to become more emotionally mature, but that part of me that maybe wants to point things out gets to come along with me all along the way. And so I have a more emotionally mature part of me that I have access to at times. But then at the same time, I still have that other part inside of me. Yeah. And I'm all over the place because this is bringing up so much different stuff for me to think about, Tony. But also I wanted to point out, or I wanted to mention, let's see if I can grab a hold of it too, right? Because these things are flowing through my head so quickly right now. Damn it, it's gone. It'll come back.
Just a quick pause to thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the podcast. We really appreciate it. Our goal with the podcast is to reach as many people as possible, and you can help with that. So whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the many other places podcasts are available, if you would hit subscribe, that would help us immensely. And if you're feeling extra supportive, you could leave us a 5-star review and share one of your favorite episodes. Maybe this one. So again, thank you for listening. And now back to this episode.
Well, but let me do my trick though. I'll start talking, and when it comes back, you cut me off. I feel like this is why these are what my therapy sessions look like. And I love them. I love when you said I'm all over the place. Well, you're just being and doing. I mean, this is the first time we've been talking together on this podcast. So check that out. And so that's how it's showing up. And I mean, I think we have to look at ourselves that way. So I love modeling that in a session. And sometimes it will be the most ADD back and forth session. And I mean, that's the part where somebody even cuts me. I give them permission. Please cut me off. Please call me out. We're having a shared experience here. So, has it done it yet? I mean, that was real stuff I was saying.
It's so close. It's so close.
Okay.
There was some component of it where it was like, we're all on this huge spectrum and we're trying to figure it all out.
Okay,
got it. It's the dance between, I have to learn how to self-soothe.
Yes.
And I have to become really good at doing that in not toxic, maladaptive, terrible coping mechanism ways, right? In really healthy ways, which is part of the journey that we're both on, is learning how to exactly do that, how to soothe our own nervous systems, provide ourselves with our own needs. I mean, it's the whole narrative that exists out there in culture where it's like, you have to learn to love yourself before you can love somebody else.
It really is. It sounds so cliche, but that is it. And you don't even, I find that people don't even know what that means until they are starting to experience it. And
I want to speak to that, because what I was thinking about is, yes, I believe that. Yes, I have to learn how to do that. And I think it's also really important that I am also able to be soothed. Like there's a part of the process where I want to be open enough to also allow somebody to come in and love me, to help me, to, because it's like anything else where we can push it to an extreme. I can be so far out onto the spectrum of, I'm not going to need anybody's help. I'm so good at self-soothing. I'm so good at self-love. Yes, I'm in relationships with people, but I don't really need, like, you can push all the way out to that extreme, or go all the way to the other end of the extreme where you're the man child that has to have everything done for them. Right. Yeah. And I feel like there really is an important aspect of bringing both of those two things, the need to be able to love yourself and soothe yourself, and also allow other people to do it for you as well.
Okay, let me speak to that, because I'm glad you said that. If we would have gotten through the interview without, then I would have probably emailed you back and said we got to do more, because that's such a key piece. So what that looks like is, so when we're kids and we want to be told we're okay, we get our sense of self from external validation. So it's normal. I mean, we're going to, that's why some kids, they become perfectionists and they only get validation when they are perfect, or some kids only get validation when they shut down and when they play small. And so there's a lot of different ways we get validation inside of our family system. And
hold on, Tony.
Kids. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Holy shit.
So oftentimes in podcasts, right, we'll be listening to somebody talk and then there'll be just this fucking, so we only get validation when we play small.
Like, I've never heard that flip side of it.
Yeah. So it's like how you show up to get your needs met. So did I get my needs met by always being the person that was couldn't do things and I needed my parent to rescue me. So then I felt good. That was the only way I got connection. Or was I the star athlete? And that's the way I got that validation. So, and it's why,
so I needed my parents to rescue me in order to feel good, in order to get validated.
Well, maybe that was the only time that they interacted with you. I mean, this is that part where, I'll go all the way back coming out of the womb. I mean, and I got a whole speech on this where we exit the womb. We don't even know we exist until we interact with another human. So from that moment forward, as a baby, we have to get our needs met. Now, when we're babies, we're cute, we cry, we poop, and people feed us and clean our diapers. But then when we get a little bit older, all of a sudden we can emote and speak, and now they're not. Well, that I must be bad. It must be a me issue. How do I get them to meet my needs? I'm going to jump up and down, juggle. I'm going to take care of my brother, or I'm going to break a window, because at some point I want to be seen, because I don't even know I exist until somebody acknowledges me. So that's how, in the therapy world, you'll often say that people will get there. They want attention, whether it's positive or negative. That sounds insane until you look at it from I don't know I exist until I interact with another person, and that person is typically going to be my parent. In larger family systems, it ends up being some of the older siblings, or this is why the friendship dynamic becomes so important, because, you happen to drop in with some friends, and that's where I get my validation by the things they do or that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to jot that down on a piece of paper, babe. We're going to have to sit with that one.
Yeah, that's going to.
Well, what's so interesting is, so then moving forward, this is where if I take that speech the rest of the way, then now as a kid, if I say, okay, I'd like to have cereal for dinner, or I would like a pony, and my parents say no, I do have a line where I say every kid is, now there's your little narcissist, the little kid is, because they only have a view of self, and they don't know. I mean, I don't even know what my dad did for a living until I still not 100% sure, even now he's retired. But my parents were apparently like interacting with each other. They didn't just like become animated when I walked in the room, which it seemed like as a kid. So now all of a sudden, if they were telling me no, then, and I think that's actually like the origin story of things like shame, where, well, they must not get the pony because I must be doing something wrong. Because when I was little and I asked for something, they would give it to me, but now they're not. So, man, what is wrong with me? I must be bad. And so in that scenario, then we go into adolescence, we go into our relationships, and we're so afraid that this person won't like me that then I'm going to try to become the person that I need to be to get that person to like me. So it's interesting. I'll do this with my hands, but I always say that we go into relationships and we become codependent and enmeshed. And there's just an acceptance there. Then as we start to go through life and we have different experiences, we now start to have different feelings and emotions. So we're becoming differentiated. Differentiated is where one person ends and the other begins. So we're codependent and enmeshed. We start trying to pull away and become differentiated, but then the other person's like, really? That's what you think? Oh, well, no, not really. We go back into that enmeshment. And so that's where, when you said earlier, and it was so spot on, when you become differentiated, in the middle of where one person ends, the other begins, is a lot of invalidation and a lot of discomfort, which is what typically keeps us jumping back into enmeshment, back into codependency. And because it does feel uncertain to then think, well, because people often say, well, why would I even want to be in a relationship if they're them and I'm me? And that's a story my brain tells me to keep me back into that enmeshment or codependency, because it's like growth through discomfort. And there's a philosopher named Terence McKenna that talks about, it's like jumping out into the great abyss and finding out that there's a feather bed, which is what it can be when you learn what that looks like or feels like to actually be myself, and my partner is themselves, and we don't have to manage each other's emotions, which gets back to, I'm glad. Okay. But then, so when now you are feeling differentiated, now it is perfectly okay to ask for things in the relationship. I mean, that's what we do, but you're coming from a place of not trying to manipulate, coerce, control, or get validation. So now I'm saying, I have chosen me, and I would love if we could connect in this way, and now I'm putting that out to this other person. Now, if they say no, but I don't want you to get mad at me. Well, it's like, well, I put this out there. You can say no. If I get mad at you, that's a me issue. Like, so I might have some feelings. I might be disappointed. That's part of the human experience, but I can deal with that disappointment and still maintain this connection with you. And when you can start to establish a pattern of safety, emotional safety like that, then the other person might be able to self-confront and say, well, why did I just say no? Why am I unwilling to take a look at this person's needs? Because they're not trying to, at this point now, to coerce, control, manipulate me. So then I get to look at myself. What is it about what they were asking that brought those emotions up in me? And that's where you really start to see intimacy, like real intimacy, not just, there's a phrase out there that we think we're wanting intimacy, but really we're just trading validation. But when we really can, it takes a lot of courage to really show up and let somebody know you, and a tremendous amount of courage to know who somebody else is, because that is going to be wading through a lot of that discomfort, and there will be disappointment. But yeah, you are allowed to ask for things in your relationship when it's coming from that place. So again, a lot of words there, I know, but man, we're hitting all the fun stuff today.
So much fun stuff. It's really challenging, the validation part, I think, because there's a part of me that, I'm getting better and better and better. Like we had a disagreement this weekend, and what I was continually trying to do was just identify the part inside of me that was being super triggered and activated. Okay. And I could almost, existentially, a lot of it was like parts work stuff, and going to that part and just trying to do my best to hear it, to see what they were expressing, see what they were feeling, and then just to validate that experience for that part of me. Yeah. But I found it to be so incredibly challenging to then come back out of that experience and back into our relationship and back into kind of like the soup that was being kind of stirred up and, created because of both dynamics playing out between both of us. And so there's a part of me that, I guess, and again, I don't know, right? I recognize completely as well that the version that Craig is today is so completely different than the version Craig will be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But the version that I am today, there's a part of me that will always want validation. And I don't think that's necessarily a part of me that I want to get rid of. Like, like I'm always going to want to, at the end of the day, have Stephanie tell me that it's okay, that she still loves me, that, she's proud of me. Like that external validation, I guess I'm having a hard time. Yeah. I'm not quite to the point in my healing where it feels the same as the internal validation that I'm giving myself. Like the internal validation feels forced at times. It doesn't feel as soothing or as comforting as the really good, genuine, honest external validation that she'll give me. So part of me thinks, well, I need both. Yeah. I want both of those things, right?
Yeah. And meeting you right where you're at. And I love this part where it's, and who am I to tell you, well, actually what you need to do is, because that's part of that journey. And who am I to say that somebody can't sit in that place and find happiness? Maybe my experience has been different. And this is what I love too, about going back to the things that we could talk about today. I often say that you can't. It's funny. I've realized lately when I often say, that's me wanting validation. I'm wanting people to know. I've been saying this for a while, you guys. I'm really smart. It's so, that part. We're talking on week 2 now, I think, of realizing that I've been editing it out of my podcast. What I said on a previous episode was, I'm like, nobody cares. Like, I know that I said this on a previous episode. That's kind of the vibe,
I said that earlier in this episode. I'm like, I'm with you. I'm like, okay, I hear that.
And that's the part that gets, I think something shifts at some point where it is funny. And it's such, you learn that you're doing these things in real time. I made up a phrase called micro differentiation that I'm breaking live right here now, which I might throw away later. But in the moment, you recognize how often within a sentence that you're seeking validation. A lot of this is why it's difficult for people to not fluff up a story every now and again, because they think, well, if this story's boring, this person's going to tune out. So they have to.
But if we look at validation as like a core need, right? Because like if I can intersperse validation and love, and there's nuance in there, and we could go through another 2-hour podcast on the philosophy between the differentiation between validation and love and all those kind of different things. But at the same time, I do think that a core human trait that we need in order to be happy and survive and function as a human is external validation. We need somebody to come over and pick us up from the crib and validate and love. And I think that is such a core need that, it's literally the struggle that I go back and forth with. I need to be able to meet this need myself. And at the same time, I don't want to become so accustomed. Like, I still want to leave space to get that external validation because I think it's necessary. Like, I think it's foolish to think that we are somehow evolved out of that need anymore as just a straight up human being trying to, community, love, connection. It's what it's all about. So why would I shame myself or push so hard against something? I think I just need to develop this other skill as well. And it's healthy validation, right? A lot of the external validation that I was getting for a really long time was not healthy validation. It wasn't from people that were safe. It wasn't from people that I could trust. It wasn't quote unquote good validation for me. And I think that's an important thing to kind of bring awareness to. But I don't necessarily, like I said, I don't want to get rid of it. I love being validated by my partner.
Yeah. Well, let me
Is that a bad thing? Like, that's not a bad thing, right?
Well, I love it. I'll go back to it just is a thing. Check that out, because it like that is a thing. That is how you feel, and I see that, and this is where I realized the hippies were right. They really were, because this is where I want to say, and I'm grateful for you sharing that presence with me, because I felt that, and that made a difference in me, but I do wonder, because I love this concept. Like I always say, guys,
Tony, he's always saying.
By the way, I look at that often as an emotionally immature narcissistic trait when somebody always says, and you know me, because I'm like, I think that what they're saying is like, because I really don't know myself, so I'm hoping that you will validate this, because I think this is what versus the I have to know me, and I know that's where it's getting into the differentiation weeds, but we don't know what we don't know. I mean, the beautiful concept of that Dunning-Kruger effect, that the more we realize that we learn, the more we realize the things that we don't know, because we didn't know what we're now learning. And so when somebody is saying, I'm the best at this, or, me, or like I've always said, or, I mean, they're just wanting still people to know that they know these things. But if I know these things, then I no longer need to get that type of validation. And so I do find that the more that I'm learning to stay grounded or self-soothe in a moment, that there is a different energy maybe around presence. This is where I go into those, whether in Indian culture, Shiva and Shakti, yin and yang, masculine, feminine, that presence, the healthy version of that presence, the picture frame to the artwork, the riverbank to the flowing water, that emotional consistency, that self-validation, that knowing who I am, it does provide this sense of presence. And then I feel like it is a different version of a connection with somebody that maybe isn't necessarily the same as what that validation feels like, but it's like, I am so here now, present and connected, that I do sense a version of that. And I'm not saying I have this either. I still love validation, but that where that would require less validation, and we're having more of a shared experience. And I did a podcast a long time ago about shared experiences. I mean, you get to the point where your pupils dilate, that they get in alignment, your heart rate starts to get in alignment. And I wonder if that's really where I've chosen me. I am confident in who I am. And now I am showing up the best version of myself, fully present. And now I want to know you. And I want to know everything about you. And we're going to have this shared experience that I do. And I imagine a world where maybe that replaces that need for validation. And it is like, because I have self-validated, now I'm connecting. So that's one I want to throw out there. We'll see. Maybe we'll do another episode in a couple of years, and we're both going like, yeah, it's a bunch of crap.
Right. What the hell were we thinking? Right? No, what I'm recognizing as we're unpacking it a little bit more is I am now practicing what I think in a really healthy way is learning how to self-soothe meet my needs when I'm activated. Mm-hmm. And the part that I don't want to get rid of, or that I don't want to turn my back to, or that I don't want to walk away from, is still getting that external validation just when I'm nice and regulated. Like, yeah. I recognize the unhealthiness of being like, soothe me, make me feel better. I'm nervous. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm worked up. I'm triggered. That part, I'm like, yeah, I got to fix that part. But I still want the component where, okay, I'm calm. I'm regulated. I feel good in my body. And, like, it's almost like, let's just sit around and bask in the love that we have for each other, because it's kind of beautiful, right? It kind of lights us up. It kind of feels really, really good to have that connection. And it also fuels the journey. It fuels the experience, I think. And so for me, that's a nuance there where it's, I want to be able to do it more consistently and just get better and better and better at doing it when I'm dysregulated, just for myself, right? Catch it sooner, figure out healthy ways to do it when I'm dysregulated. So then it's not Stephanie's responsibility or anybody else's responsibility. And then also, cool, I'm super regulated. Let's just connect now, whether it's in that super deep way that you were just referring to, which we've had some of those experiences before with one another. And I mean, it's unreal. It's beautiful. And it's also.
Yeah. I have some thoughts on that.
Let's hear it, babe.
Now it's perspective, right? But so when you are needing validation, and I just might be doing my thing where I'm just going to super validate you right now. I'm not sure. But when you are needing validation, right? When you are doing amazing, right?
Tony is super good.
You are.
Maybe he's saying all the time that.
Honestly, I really am enjoying this episode. I'm enjoying this podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Like, this has been really fantastic.
I am as well. We're having a shared experience, right?
We are. And that's my point. Like, so when you're needing validation, you're asking, it's coming from, I mean, it can come from an activated place. It can come from a wounded place. You're like, validate me, because there was a need that I did not receive. There was a need that wasn't met, and I don't know how to meet it for myself. And that can be a narcissistic way to get that validation. And it can also be like, you've got this little inner child that has this need. And then it's this vulnerable, like, I'm really scared right now, and I'm co-regulating with my partner and getting some validation here, which I think is a healthy thing to have with somebody. And then when you're talking about this shared experience, from my point of view, this shared experience where, like, oh, we are getting it. We are vibing right now. Our pupils are dilated. Our hearts are matching. That is also, you're not in an activated state. You're not in a wounded state. You are in the super connected. That's also a form of validation. It's just not a need, a pulling of a validation. It's still like, isn't that like just a super validating moment?
Right.
To be
overall kind of like, hey,
be in connection.
Your life is going so beautifully. You're in this really safe place that you've managed to work and
that's how I'm seeing it. Like, I'm willing to be wrong. Like you said, 5 years, 10 years down the road, I'm like, oh, can you believe what I just said? But that's pumping me up right now. It feels like.
Well, and that's what I think. What I like about that is back to the we don't know what we don't know. Now, I can't lie. Being a couples therapist almost 20 years now, when I start with a new couple and they're like, he said this and she did this, and I'm wanting to have this conversation. It's almost, I have to, talk about it. I got to stay present, because I just want to say, guys, this stuff is so trivial. Let's get into the deep end of the pool. Bad analogy. I don't swim very well, but you know where I'm going with that, right? And if I can talk too about the validation piece, what I think is interesting is, I want to, by the way, I just texted my associate and said we're skipping supervision today. So tell me if that's okay.
Okay, cool.
So I do want to, this is going to sound a little bit out of order, but there was something that you had said a little bit ago, Craig, about when we were talking about, hey, I'm sorry that the thing I've said has made you feel a certain way. I just want to acknowledge what's so interesting is things are so not black or white, all or nothing. And I'm still trying to figure out a way to communicate more of those moments where it's something that I know that maybe I used to say from an immature way. Like, sorry, I'm sorry you felt that way. Now, from a mature and a more emotionally mature way is, I am sorry you felt that way. Now tell me more, because the thing I have said has caused you to have feelings. It makes sense. And I want to know you now. I want to understand, versus the, I'm sorry, you felt that way, which is like, that's a you thing, And so I think that one's kind of significant, because people will hear that phrase a lot and they'll say, I don't really like that phrase. And if you're the person that used to say, I'm sorry you feel that way, but you've done the work and it's 3 years later and you say that to your partner and you say, I'm sorry you feel that way. And then they say, I don't think you care. Now I know the work I've done. So I know I care. So I can stay grounded, and now I can be more curious. Well, tell me what that experience is like for you. Where that's like the perfect example, I think, of a me thing and maybe the journey I have gone through. And so when people go through those experiences, what's so fascinating is they will continue to show up and appear to be a certain version that other people have experienced. And when other people then push against this is who I think you are, that is a whole other level of needing to be differentiated or needing to self-soothe, because now we want to scream through the windows, I'm not that person anymore. You know?
That happens all the time for us, even just in the span of, because what'll happen, and as you're speaking about it, I'm sitting here thinking about, we'll have that dynamic play out where, I had all of these really unhealthy ways of being in relationship. And slowly over time, they've had to change and evolve. Some of them have completely gone away. Some of them are in the process of going away. Some of them are still subconscious and I'm not even aware of them.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's this, like, there's so many times where we're recognizing that we're getting into arguments and disputes with each other, but it's not really with each other. It's with a past version of the other person. And what I'm sensing, or what I'm thinking about, not sensing, that's not the right word. What it made me think of was, sometimes, because Steph will do this where she'll say, like you're doing X, Y, or Z, right? The sorry, I made you feel that way. That was one of my go-tos. That was one that I used a lot early on in our relationship. And I can hear it through the lens that you're talking about it now, where it's like, okay, I've done work and I can acknowledge, I know how much work I've done to shift and change and heal that part. And truthfully, I think Stephanie does as well. There's a lot of times where we both acknowledge how much growth we've each had, but there's still a part of her, a version of her that is being triggered and is coming from that place. So it's like when she says, you're not, you're doing that thing that you used to do. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Don't you see I've changed?
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah. That's an argument that happens sometimes, but truthfully, it's like, no, I'm not actually doing that thing. You're just in a version of yourself that feels like I'm still doing that thing. And then I can just sit in the space that I, have awareness of, where I'm like, okay, tell me more. What are you feeling? Giving her that opportunity to just flesh out where she's coming from. Because we do that all the time, babe, where we have awareness of that, where it's like, oh, we're having an argument that, we used to have all the time, or previous versions of us had. Or there's times where you're in, conflict with me and I'm fully in an older version of myself. And you're like, I gotta, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes total sense. Like that definitely happens. There's like, I've had this realization.
There's the validation part again.
Right.
Tell me I'm not crazy.
Right? You're
does that
not
make
crazy.
Sense?
Right.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
There's like, once we had awareness of that, is that really seeing each other through like old eyes in a sense, and having that space of where I'm like, sometimes we trauma here, sometimes we trauma see. I'm relating to a past wound, a past experience, and applying it to this situation. And I don't want to feel that again. So all my parts are freaking out. My nervous system's freaking out, and I'm learning how to assert boundaries. So instead of letting it happen, I'm saying, hey, here's this thing. And I begin reacting all over you. And there's also the flip side too, where it's like, we hold each other accountable in spaces. So when I'm in a calm state, I'm like, this is a behavior that doesn't feel good for me. Is this like, this is where you're leaning? There's a part sometimes where I'm acting in an old version.
Yes.
So it goes both ways.
That thing you just embodied right there, where you're like, what did you just say a second ago?
I don't know, but now I'm nervous. I'm like, I don't know what is that.
It was the thing where you were like, because when you will put on is the wrong word, right? When you will embody like the healthy version of you that is like, hey, I'm standing here trying to have this conversation with you. And basically what you're doing is you're just reflecting back to me how immature I'm behaving right now in the moment for whatever
like
reason.
In self energy, the calm energy.
Yeah. And you're genuinely there. You're not in because we both would dance back and forth in that space of being like, I'm the calm one over here. You're the crazy one, right? Where it's not that feeling, right? But it's so hard for me in that moment to be because literally what you're doing is you're pointing out my immaturity. You're saying you're being emotionally immature. Can you not see it? And is
that how it feels?
That's how it feels. Wow. But
that would feel really
well, the reality is
crappy.
In that moment, I can't see it because you're dealing with 33-year-old Craig, 23-year-old, 7-year-old Craig, right?
Yeah. If it feels like I'm pointing it out like you, I wouldn't be able to see it either.
Tony, one of the things that we talk about in our relationship, it's something that we avoid talking about because of how uncomfortable it is, but it's that dynamic of parent and child and how it will oftentimes be flipped and mirrored in relationships.
Yes.
And how awkward that gets to be over time, especially once you bring awareness to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I love watching you guys even interact there was you've said, when you guys talk about your show, I've heard you say, and I think you said earlier today that you put up a big mirror. And I think that is, that really the relationship can be a place where my spouse is showing me where I am out of alignment with my true self or character. And that's part of that self confrontation, but it's hard to do in the moment. And then I think when we get away from the moment at times, then we don't want to jump back in there because it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's where I was saying earlier, where I think, like I always say, where then we just say, are we good? Because we don't want to go back in and feel that way again. I will say that these 4 pillars I mentioned earlier are really good at applying to a situation that occurred. Because now I can look at that and say, okay, you were not trying to hurt me, and I can't tell you what you were doing was wrong. But let me ask you questions. Take me on your train of thought. What were you seeing? I have to stay present, and I can't go into this victim mindset. And then let me share what was going on in my world. And that's where I really feel like the concepts of the goal is to be heard. It is to be able to just hear what your experience was. Sometimes it is easier to go back and do that in hindsight because we aren't trying to work toward resolution. The resolution already happened somehow. So I think that's kind of fascinating too. And I will say, it's funny when you talk about that parent-child dynamic, or I just have to throw this one in there. This is a little ADD side note, but you always, if you guys have heard this concept where the theory is we end up marrying our parent or that sort of thing. I was never a big fan of that one at all. And then I remember hearing when I was learning a lot about differentiation, there was a concept of the familiar, and that resonated. So, if you look in these different attachment styles, or I'm definitely obviously the anxiously attached. So I spent my life trying to get validation from my parents. Look at me, and so then if I would have been in a relationship with somebody that was giving me validation, it would have felt overwhelming. So I go find somebody that is more avoidant attached, again, from an amazing person. We've been married 34 years. But it's like she's more of that subdued, quiet, calm person. So then that resonated. Oh, there's the familiar. I'm going to dance and perform and try to say, look at me, but that person is the familiar, is that they aren't necessarily saying, oh my gosh, you're the greatest person all the time, everywhere. And so then that just continues my anxious attachment of, is everything okay? Which just furthers that gap between anxious and avoidant, where now it's like, boy, I'm a lot to handle, so then this person most likely over time doesn't really want to give me the validation I'm so craving because I'm asking for it all the time. So that part's really interesting too. So then this differentiation piece is why I think it's so important to then recognize, oh, I do have to figure myself out so I can show up better in this relationship, but the relationship is what's showing me that who I am, if I'm willing to self-confront and sit with those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, I really like that distinction of like the familiar energy, the familiar vibe, rather than necessarily, you married your mother or you married your father, right. Just repeating those patterns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an uncomfortable thing. Really, I mean, the uncomfortable part of it is there's truth to it. Like, you see familiar things that you saw as a child. You see things, whether you can visually, like, at some point we get enough, what you know, and you can put the pieces together and be like, oh shit, that's the exact same thing playing out. And then unconsciously, those things are still happening kind of below the surface a lot of times, where we think about the vibe of our house and kind of the energy of our house and how our house feels. And over the course of our relationship, it has mirrored each one of our origins, like each one of our homes of origin. And it's like, how do we actually create the vibe that we want? How do we create the home that we want? And it's not just the house and the home and everything like that, but it's also the relationship, because it speaks to the deeper thing of like, we're creating a relationship now between the two of us that neither one of us has ever really witnessed before. Absolutely. We don't have a framework for it. And so it's trying to put together a bunch of different pieces over the course of, our time together to figure it all out.
Well, and there's a belief that and it kind of makes sense then, that concept of the familiar. So you're going to end up in a relationship most likely with somebody that is equally differentiated. This differentiation therapist, David Schnarch, often said, if you think you're the more differentiated person in the relationship, you're not, because you're in the relationship. So if you were really that evolved or differentiated, then would you still be seeking the validation or trying to defend yourself? And I loved that. I had to sit with that one for a little bit. But then if you've gone through trauma, or if you're in therapy and you're working on things, you can change that level of differentiation, by, I don't know some number, but a lot. If your baseline was, let's say 1 and now you're at 2, so you improved a little bit in your relationship. When you figure these things out, you're going to jump up to a 5 or a 6, and then now your kids will then see this completely different relationship modeled. So now they're going to, and that's where that exponential growth comes from, instead of just people kind of continuing the family pattern. So I think that's a really beautiful concept, and why, again, I go back to, we're not broken, we're human. We're just figuring this out for the first time. And it actually takes courage to then go and get help and to figure things out, because it is a lot easier, so to speak, to then fall into those patterns of this just is, I'm broken, and then turn to all the unhealthy coping mechanisms and say, I'm going to deal with it later. And then later doesn't end up happening. And over time, part of your implicit memory, or what it feels like to be you, which is based on this whole slow residue of your lived experience, becomes, I never did it, so this must just be it. And man, that stuff breaks my heart. It really does. I have to give us I've got about a 5-minute warning. Man,
I wanted to, we'll wrap up real quick with this, because, and this isn't an easy question to wrap up with, but we've talked about a lot of different things. We've addressed a bunch of different areas. I think that at this point, people that are listening, or even just people that are on a path where they're trying to improve and become a better version of themselves, whether they're in a relationship or they're not in a relationship, what are some things that you just think are super beneficial to keep in mind on that journey? Because I think the conversation that we've just had it documents very well how much there is, how deeply involved this journey and this experience is, and how overwhelming it can be and is at times. So what are just some key things for people to kind of hold on to kind of continue down the path?
I love it. I will say, and I didn't get a chance to do my big stump speech here about acceptance and commitment therapy, but that might be a really good way to kind of just give somebody a starting place. I personally, as a practicing mental health practitioner for almost 20 years, love the fact that the stigma around mental health has lessened, and we can talk about it more. But if you look at the rates of depression, anxiety, things like that, they are higher. And so I believe that a lot of that, I can pull my old man card and say it's social media and tell the kids to get off my lawn and say all those kind of things. But I really think a lot of it too is the more that we're talking about it, I do worry that maybe not the best tools are the ones that are being used the most. And so those are the ones, and this is again why I love I just drew a blank on her name, the therapist you had talking about internal family systems, and I know her name, but
Natalie
that she kind of now that she alluded to this as well. It just one line she said of like, and then the therapist can tell you how to think differently or how to feel about something, and she's like, and she was saying that's crazy, and it is, because that's a me thing. I almost feel like that's the therapist wanting validation. Come in here and I will tell you how to change your life. That will make me feel better. And if you're seeking validation, then you'll leave and say, okay, good. Did I do that well? But then you go back into your life and now it's like, okay, what was I supposed to do? Or how was I supposed to think or feel? So I was a cognitive behavioral therapist for 10 years, almost 7 years. And then I stumbled upon a training in acceptance and commitment therapy. So it's just like she was talking about internal family systems as a new kid on the block, 30, 40 years old. ACT is maybe 25 or 30 years old. So it is also a new therapeutic modality, but it's got about, I think it's 4,000, 4,500 peer-reviewed journals that basically show its efficacy is off the charts. It's so much larger than just, better than placebo, which so many treatments are, because here it is in a nutshell. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a great place to start though. If you are just beating yourself up, it does start from a place of accepting that your thoughts are negative, your automatic negative thoughts. You're going to stomp out these ants, or you're stinking thinking, but you're starting with you're thinking wrong. So then your thought leads to your emotion. Now I feel sad. And then your emotion leads to your behavior. I'm going to not go outside. So again, I practiced this for years. You were trying to get somebody that will think of it differently. What's a different way to think of it? Because then that will lead you to a different emotion and a different behavior. And I love telling this story. I'll make sure I got time. Yes. So at the time I learned ACT, I was working with somebody that had, in essence, lost half of their body weight. So let's say that they had been 400 pounds, now they're 200 pounds. They had some social anxiety and they were trying to put themselves out there and find a relationship. But when they would go to these activities, when people, they would open the door, walk in, everybody would look at them, they would say, I feel like everybody's staring at me and they think I look horrible. So I was literally a CBT therapist at that time. And I'm saying, what are some other things you could be thinking, or that they might be thinking? Maybe that they actually think you look good. Maybe they like the color of your shirt. Maybe it's a sunny day right beside you. And so then that makes that person feel good in the moment. Okay, I can do that. And then I feel like a good therapist. They get validation. They go back to the next event. The door opens, they walk in, everybody looks at them and they're like, oh no, everybody thinks I look horrible. And now they get to tell themselves, I'm not even good at therapy. So then they come back in, we come up with some different ideas. And so then over time, then I feel like the person is finally just goes, yeah, no, it's kind of helping. And then they disappear. I think, well, I think it worked. And then they're off to the next course, book, self-help, whatever, therapist, continually looking for that. I got to find the thing to make me feel better. So then, so acceptance and commitment therapy starts with again, you're the only you that's ever walked the face of the earth, with all of your nature, nurture, birth order, DNA, abandonment, rejection, hopes, fears, dreams. So you start from a place of you think and feel the way you do because you do, period. Nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're human. That is beautiful when you really start to look at that. Now we go back to what we talked earlier. We're wired to say what's wrong with me because that's where I think that childhood stuff comes in. It's like, well, they're not giving me candy corn for dinner. I asked, so what is wrong with me? Why are they not meeting my needs so easily anymore? So ACT then says you think and feel the way you do because you do. No stinking thinking, no automatic negative thoughts. But now, what are your goals? And they have to be based on your values. And most of us, we all get our values from our parents, from our church, from our community, because we're just told this is what you need to care about. But that's part of that differentiation process as a human is, well, what do I care about? And so a lot of the work I do once we start with you're the only you, then it's like, what do you care about? And I've got a whole values exercise. And when people go through that, they're like, well, I know I need to work. I know I'm honesty's a value. But then let's say they grew up in a home where honesty was brutal and it was harsh. So now, they might say, okay, but I don't, but if somebody says, how do I look in these jeans? I don't feel like being honest. So I guess that's bad. When we get into that whole cycle where it's like, or maybe your value might be compassion. And so once you recognize what your values are, then I talk about this concept of the yeah buts. So if somebody says my value is honesty, and then somebody says, how do I look? Well, my value is honesty, but I'm not going to be telling the truth. I need to tell them, or the yeah, but is, well, if I'm honest, then yeah, but I'm going to hurt their feelings. So, but if my core value, honestly is honesty, then we're not even arguing if that's a true or false statement. It is, but that's an unproductive thought toward your core value of honesty. This is why I have a core value of compassion. So if somebody says, how'd you like the food? I'm going to say, that was pretty good. Now, the yeah, but is, yeah, but you're not being honest. I'm like, totally. That's not a productive thought toward my value-based goal of compassion in that moment. So as we start to recognize our values, back to this guy's example, he wanted a social connection. So then when he walked in, he had a value of connection because he had been disconnected his whole life. Value of connection, he walks in there, and now all of a sudden, if he's like, I think they're looking at me, then there's acceptance of, yeah, they might be, but is that a value-based, is that a productive thought toward your value-based goal of connection? And that's where the magic starts happening. If I start from I'm me, it's okay to feel and think the way I do, and then I start to discover my values, then I realize that I'm going to have all these yeah buts that are going to try to keep me safe. Kind of back to some of the parts work. And then I get to learn how to bring those with me. So now I'm not trying to fight it. I'm not thinking the wrong thing. It's a thing. And yeah, maybe they are looking at me. I'm going to bring that with me while I interact with people. And that becomes more of this emotionally mature, it's called whole object relations response, where I can feel this way. I can want the connection. I can also feel worried. I can be scared. I can be funny. And I'm going to bring all that stuff here. And over time, what it feels like to be me is somebody that's taking action on things that matter to me. And
this is awesome. We could do a whole other podcast on this.
Let's do it. I will come back because there's so much there. And I noticed I'm bringing gentle awareness. So I noticed I have a client in 8 minutes and I must go to the bathroom. So,
let's go.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Yes.
We're going to drop all your stuff in the show notes down below.
Oh, you guys, this was so fun. I want to have you on my podcast, and I want to come back. We could talk for hours.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
They really just did. Yeah.
Okay. Don't go once we push stop. Don't go anywhere, Tony. Okay, everybody else, good. Thank you so much for listening, and expect the best.
Plan for the greatest.
Wait and see, you and me. We were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal experiences and insights, things we have found to be helpful on our healing journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe that we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.